Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast.
Right.
Today we're going to be looking at a fascinating company, Marvell Technology. The ticker is MRVL,
Okay.
and you sent over a whole bunch of articles and analysis pieces about this semiconductor company. Seems like a really interesting one.
Yeah.
And our goal is to really, kind of unpack it all. What's the most important stuff for our listeners to understand right now about Marvell?
Well, I think what's really interesting about what you sent over is we've got their overview of the business, what they do, their recent performance, how the stock's been doing some key news items like their latest earnings report, and then some interesting stuff on insider trading activity,
I saw that.
analyst outlooks, and even some technical analysis too.
All right, a whole blend.
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting is it seems like there's some really strong potential here, but also there's been some volatility recently.
Interesting.
So I think it'd be good to navigate those details together.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to kind of set the stage here, can you give us just a really fundamental understanding of what Marvell does? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of scale are we talking about here with this company?
So Marvell is a company that's been around since 1995. They're based in Santa Clara, California.
Okay.
And you can think of them as a pretty significant player in the semiconductor space. They develop and produce integrated circuits and related technologies. These are the kinds of things that are really the brains of a lot of the electronics that we use every day.
Gotcha.
And specifically, they're known for their work in data centers, where all that information gets processed.
Right.
And also in networking technology.
Yeah.
So really enabling our devices to talk to each other.
Fascinating.
And they've grown quite a bit since 1995. By 2024, they had over 6,500 employees, and were bringing in annual revenue of $5.5 billion.
Wow.
So yeah, you're talking about a pretty substantial operation here.
So a major player in the semiconductor space. Now let's talk about how the market's currently valuing them. What can you tell us about Marvell's recent stock performance?
So as of right now, Marvell's stock price is sitting around 68.28 per share.
Yep.
And what's interesting is it's actually down about 3% recently, but it's shown a little bit of a rebound just in the last 24 hours, up about 2.41%.
Wow, that's a little bit of movement there.
Yeah, a little back and forth. And then if you look at the company's market capitalization as a whole, that's about $59.3 billion.
Wow.
So that gives you a sense of, its overall value in the market.
Okay, so definitely some movement there, as you said.
Yeah.
Now, a key event that probably had an impact on that volatility was their recent fiscal fourth quarter earnings report.
Yes.
What were the highlights of that report, and how did the market seem to react to it?
Yeah, so this is where things get a little bit puzzling. Marvell actually exceeded Wall Street's expectations, both for their revenue and for their earnings per share. But despite that, the stock price actually dropped pretty significantly after the report came out.
Oh, wow. How much are we talking?
It fell about 16%.
Oh, that's a pretty sharp drop.
It is, yeah, and it really suggests that investors weren't just focused on those raw numbers. They were probably digging a little deeper and looking at other factors.
That's always interesting to see that kind of disconnect. A company beats expectations, but the stock still goes down.
Right.
What could be some of the reasons for that?
Right. Well, in these situations, investors are often looking beyond the immediate past performance.
Makes sense.
They might be paying more attention to what's called forward guidance. So that's the company's own projections for revenue and profitability in the coming quarters.
Right, trying to predict the future.
Exactly. And if that outlook wasn't as strong as investors were hoping for, or if it suggested maybe growth might slow down a bit, that could definitely explain why the stock dropped, even though the current results were good.
Gotcha.
Another possibility is that expectations were already really high going into the earnings report.
Baked into the cake.
Exactly. So even beating those expectations might not have been enough to push the stock price any higher.
Right, because it was already priced in.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the market's always trying to stay one step ahead. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. We also have some information here about insider trading activity at Marvell. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one. So we saw that Marvell's chief accounting officer, Dixon Pantoja, recently sold a chunk of shares.
Okay.
It was 1,430 shares, to be exact, and he sold them at a price of 68.75 per share.
Right.
which comes out to a total transaction value of about $98,312.
A decent-sized sale.
It is, yeah. And it's worth noting that this sale was done under what's called a pre-planned trading plan.
Right.
So these are plans that insiders often set up to sell a certain number of shares over a specific period of time.
Makes sense.
And it's meant to kind of avoid any appearance of trading on non-public information,
Right.
using inside knowledge to benefit. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, so how should we generally interpret insiders selling like this?
Right.
Is it always a red flag for investors?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could be all sorts of reasons why an insider might sell shares, especially if it's part of one of these prearranged plans. Maybe they have personal financial needs.
Yeah.
Maybe they're looking to diversify their investments.
Right.
Or maybe they have other reasons that have nothing to do with their view of the company's future.
Gotcha.
But it's still something that investors pay attention to.
Right.
They want to see what those insiders are doing. It's a data point.
It is. Yeah, it's part of the whole picture. So now let's turn to the professionals who follow this company closely.
Right.
What's the sentiment like among analysts who cover Marvell?
Well, it's interesting because even though the stock has dipped recently, the analysts who cover Marvell still seem pretty optimistic about the long term.
Interesting.
But there is quite a range in their price targets. They're not all in complete agreement.
What kind of range are we talking about?
So the lowest price target I've seen is around $81.
Okay.
And the highest is all the way up at $140.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty significant gap.
Yeah, it's a big spread. It suggests that there's still a lot of uncertainty about how quickly Marvell will be able to execute on its plans.
Right.
And how fast these new markets like AI and custom silicon will develop.
Gotcha. So why are some analysts so bullish on Marvell? What's driving that optimism?
Well, a lot of the optimism seems to be coming from Marvell's strategic focus on these high growth areas.
Okay.
Like we were talking about before, AI infrastructure and custom silicon.
Right. Those are hot areas right now.
They are very hot. And Marvell's partnerships are also seen as a big plus.
Like with who?
Well, for example, they have a partnership with Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Which is a major player in the cloud computing space.
That's huge.
Yeah. So these kinds of partnerships could really help Marvell to grow its business.
Okay, so it sounds like there is a lot of potential there, but also some unknowns, which is probably why the price targets are all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Analysts are trying to figure out how quickly things will move. Now, what about the technical picture? Are there any signals from technical analysis that we should be aware of?
So from a technical analysis perspective, the sharp decline we saw after the earnings report could be a sign that the stock was oversold in the short term.
Oversold meaning what?
Meaning that it had dropped more than it probably should have based on its fundamentals.
Okay.
And then the little bounce back we saw recently
Right.
might be a sign that buyers are starting to come back in.
Okay.
In fact, one analysis that you sent over actually gave a hold recommendation for Marvell right now, suggesting that there might be a buying opportunity if the stock dips further.
Interesting.
Or if it finds a strong level of support. But of course, technical analysis is just one way of looking at things.
Right. It's not a crystal ball.
No, it's not a crystal ball.
Okay. So taking a step back and looking at the big picture, what would you say are the main growth areas to watch for Marvell? And what are some of the risks they face?
Yeah, so I think the sources you share really highlight AI infrastructure and custom silicon as the key drivers of growth for Marvell.
Okay.
Those are the areas where they have a lot of expertise and where they're making big investments.
And those are the areas that have a lot of potential in the market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then their ability to form partnerships with companies like Amazon is a big advantage as well.
Right.
It gives them access to new markets and new customers.
Makes sense.
But on the flip side, the semiconductor industry is very competitive.
Oh, I bet.
And the market's reaction to Marvell's recent earnings shows just how sensitive their stock price can be,
Right.
to their performance and to investor sentiment.
So any hiccups along the way could really spook the market.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there are always potential risks like delays in product development,
Sure.
increased competition from rivals,
Yeah.
or changes in the broader economic environment.
So they're not immune to the ups and downs of the tech world.
No company is immune to that.
So to wrap things up, what are your big takeaways about Marvell at this point?
Well, I think the most fascinating thing is the contrast we see between the long-term outlook, which is generally quite positive, and the recent short-term reaction to their earnings, which was negative.
Right.
It really shows you how complex the market can be. Investors are always trying to weigh current performance against future expectations.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Hmm.
It seems like the market was maybe hoping for more from Marvell than just a beat on those past numbers.
Yeah, it's possible that they were looking for even stronger guidance or some other signs that growth would continue at a really rapid pace.
Right. Maybe the bar was set a little high.
Yeah, maybe so.
So for our listeners out there who are thinking about Marvell, what would you say are the key things for them to keep in mind?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Marvell has a strong foundation.
Hmm.
They're a well-established company with a lot of expertise in their field,
Right.
and they're operating in some really exciting areas with huge potential like artificial intelligence.
Wait.
But at the same time, they're not immune to market volatility. Things can change quickly in the tech world.
They can, especially in semiconductors.
Absolutely.
It's a fast-moving industry.
It is, and I think what makes Marvell so interesting right now is this divergence between the positive long-term outlook from the analysts
Hmm.
and the recent negative reaction to their earnings.
Right.
So it really raises the question, are the market's concerns overblown?
Interesting question.
Yeah. Are the long-term growth drivers strong enough to outweigh any short-term bumps in the road?
I like that.
It's
Yeah.
definitely something to think about.
Yeah. It's a good opportunity for listeners to do their own research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dig into those earnings reports, look
Right.
at the details of their AI projects,
Right?
and try to form your own conclusions.
Yeah, form your own opinion. Don't just
Say-
take our word for it.
No. This is just a starting point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much for breaking all this down with me.
Been a pleasure.
Really appreciate your insights. And for all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, we hope you found this helpful.
If you did, please subscribe, like, and comment.
We'd love to hear from you.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.